Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of our dirt cheap small block Chevy engine build. If you didn't catch the first part, it should be the last video if you want to check it out. If not, we're going to get started here and catch you up. Alright, so where we left off last time, this little guy took a dive off the table, broke, and basically stopped our plans dead in their tracks. So we ended up moving on to the cylinder heads. So we have those done, but in this box here, I was able to locate it's a little more than I need, but it's a full set of rods and pistons for 265 Chevy. I'm using an old piston ring to open the package because I don't know where my knife is, which is odd because I'm usually pretty organized. This guy did some job of packaging this stuff. Each one's in its own priority rate envelope, and then he has 4 in a box. All right, so we're going to start with piston number 4. I'm going to remove the old rings. All right, with those removed, I'm just going to give the ring lens just a quick blast with some brake clean, although they look pretty clean already. Okay, all right, so we're going to start with the oil scraper ring. This one's going to have to go in first. It's probably going to be hard to see, but there is a little ridge on the back of this. So if you try to put this in last, those other 2 rings are not going to allow this to go on. So slide that in nice and easy into the groove. The other guys are a little too thin and they end up slipping through the piston ring pliers. So I'll just do these by hand. We're going to line this groove up with the other one. We'll get this in the top. Oil scraper ring is in. Move on to the second groove. Now these guys are directional. It's going to be difficult to see on camera, but they are labeled top. Kind of see it there. So that's obviously going to go towards top of the piston. Kind of self-explanatory. Then our top groove is not directional, but the only thing you want to keep in mind is you want the gaps basically 180 degrees away from one another. In theory, those rings should actually rotate inside of the bore with the engine running, but it is recommended that you stagger the rings when putting them together. That's how I lost the first piston. Have not learned my lesson. Okay, so I'm going to start working the rod and piston into the bore, and what I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to get the bottom of the skirts started in the bore. So get that in. That dot you're going to want to go towards the front of the block. Do your best not to hit the board all going in. All right. Really not a fan of these adjustable piston ring compressors, but trying to find one in 3 3/4 inch bore was easier said than done. And when I did find one, they were 80, 90 bucks. So have to make do with this one for now. These work. It's nicer having the one-piece ones. They have a nicer taper, and I just feel a little bit better about kind of knocking the pistons into the bore when there's no gap or ridge or anything like that. But for now, this will do. I'm just keeping tension on this ring compressor just to make sure that it's flush with the deck of the block. And with that clear, we're just going to take the handle of our dead blow, which is rubber, and then just gently tap it down. All right, so we're going to take our corresponding rod cap, that into place with the tang in the cap, put a little assembly lube on either side, and we can torque this rod down. Okay, rod bolts are going to get torqued to 40 foot-pounds. Okay. All right, and while we still have that over, what I've been doing is after I install each rod and piston, I'm still coming over to the front and making sure that the engine rotates over just to make sure that nothing's stuck, bent, or anything like that. Just go 360 degrees just to make sure. A little extra, probably just spun it 3 times, but all right. So we have 2 cylinders left. I'm not going to bother filming that because it's the same procedure for either one. But I'll go ahead, we'll get those 2 in. And I think after that is going to be camshaft. And the bottom end is assembled. All 8 rods and pistons in. And the motor turns. Okay, so the microphone stopped recording, but basically the next part is going to be installing the oil pump. Now the 265 uses a specific oil pump that's different from the 58 to 87 oil pump that's typically seen in most small block Chevys. The part number for that one is M55. The factory 265 oil pump is actually a little bit taller than the generic small block Chevy one, and the drive shaft is longer as well. That 265 oil pump is pretty difficult to find, and they're very expensive. So what I did is I retrofit a Melling M55 pump onto the 265, and the only thing that needs to be done for that is to change out the drive shaft as well as the oil pump pickup. So you'll see the new oil pump drive shaft with the nylon retainer installed on this pump, and the other thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this oil pump apart, and I'm going to TIG weld the pickup onto the new oil pump once the correct angle is figured out and set up. So that's basically what's being done here. I am going to also remove the oil pump pressure relief valve, so the heat from the welder doesn't cause it to get seized into the pump. You'll see a little bit of a time lapse towards the end of this, and basically what I'm doing here is just setting the oil pump on the engine. We're going to press the pickup into it, set it at the right angle, and just make sure that it's at the correct level for the oil pan on this engine. So I'm going to stop it there, add a little bit of music, but this is basically just the oil pump installation. Healthy dose of assembly lube, we can slide our camshaft in. These are actually one of the biggest things I'm concerned with about this motor. Is for a while there have been issues with new camshafts and lifters, whether it's a manufacturing defect or an installation defect, I'm not sure. But I'm hoping that don't have any issues with these. If we do and it wipes the cam, it's not the end of the world. I don't have a ton of money on this thing. Obviously, I hope that it runs and runs well. But if it doesn't, it's not the end of the world. This was kind of an experiment just to see if a motor that was in as bad a shape as this one could be put back together and run without any machine work, or really any new parts for that matter. I mean, the exception of bearings, rings, and a couple of pistons that decided to leave the chat. This is pretty much exactly what came out of the car. Now with our camshaft in, I'm going to spin the crankshaft over until the 0 mark is at 12 o'clock. And then that 12 o'clock mark on the crank is going to get lined up to that dot on the camshaft sprocket. Just going to throw a bolt in here so it's a little easier to turn. Okay, so those two are dot to dot. And then we're going to torque these to 15 foot-pounds. Let's get these other two set all the way in. This way I'm not spinning the torque wrench for the next hour. Okay. All right, nice new timing chain. Not too much slack. All right, time to move on to the cylinder heads. Go ahead and lay the gasket down. Okay, so small block Chevy cylinder head bolts actually go through to your water jackets. So these are stock replacement Fel-Pro head bolts. As you can see, they already have a little bit of Teflon on the threads. So the torque spec for the cylinder head bolts on this particular engine is 65 foot-pounds. So the only thing I'm going to add to the threads is just a little bit of engine oil to help lubricate them. So I'll get all these set up, and then we'll go through the torque spec and torque sequence and get this last head bolted down. Hopefully you can see this here, but what I usually do is I'll just draw out a diagram of all the cylinder head bolts, in this case 17, with the correct sequence in which they get tightened up. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this in the intake valley, and we'll get started torquing these. Again, these are 65 foot-pounds. Alright, so you guys saw all of the valve train components come out of the ultrasonic cleaner. Although I didn't film it, I took all of the push rods and just blew them out with compressed air, just to make sure that all of the passages were clear, being how dirty this thing was when we took it apart. So, but they all cleaned up. I'm able to see light through every single one of them. None of them are bent, so we're going to reuse them. So I'm going to get them all set up in here, make sure that they're seated in the cup of the lifter, and then from there we can start putting our rocker arms on, and then we can do our adjustment. countless numbers of ways to adjust your rocker arms on a small block Chevy with a flat tappet camshaft. It's probably one of the most, I don't want to say difficult because it's easy, but, and I used to do it too, but I feel like it's one of the more like overcomplicated things, or the things that people overcomplicate the most. So the way I do it is with the motor in any position, doesn't matter, top dead center, does not matter for this procedure. What you're going to do is you can start on any cylinder, and you're going to go ahead and tighten the rocker arm nut until you just start to feel a little bit of drag on the push rod. And you're going to do that for every cylinder, intake and exhaust. Like I said, doesn't matter. Once you have all of them adjusted where, like I said, there's just a tiny bit of drag on the push rod, you can go ahead, and I like to turn the motor over 90 degrees. Do the same procedure another time. Rotate the engine 90 degrees again. Readjust everything. Once you're done with 3 full rotations and adjustments, you can go ahead and on every single one do 3/4 of a turn, and that's going to adjust your, that'll be the final preload. All right, let's see what we got. Got up to about 40 psi. I don't think this battery can hang. All right, not bad. That was almost past 60. So I'd say we've got oil pressure. I'm going to turn the motor over a couple times. We'll do it in a few more spots. We can go ahead and throw the intake manifold on and valve covers and start getting ready to paint this thing. Not bad. Okay, intake back on, valve covers are back on. I plugged up all of the freeze-out plugs and any gasket surface. So you have the crank snout and the timing seal plugged up. All the exhaust ports. So I'm just going to throw the old spark plugs back in, just so I don't get any paint or primer in there. And we'll start getting our first coat of primer on this. to do it for this one. Engine is back together, makes oil pressure, has a fresh coat of primer on it. I still have to dress it with the fuel pump, water pump, some other accessories, but I have those soaking right now, so we'll clean those, prime them, and then next video we'll get a coat of paint on this thing and start swinging it in the car. So thanks again for watching. If you haven't already subscribed and you do like the content, please consider doing so, and I'll see you in the next one.